capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number? Or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one. I know.
Really hard.
And maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. So tonight we are going to be continuing on in our Alexander Berkman's book, What is Communist Anarchism? Continuing on with chapter 22 tonight. We only have a few chapters left. Let's take a look at how many we have left, in fact. Let's see. Oh, we've covered quite a bit so far. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Only 8 chapters left. So we're getting pretty close to the end here. This is a longer chapter. This section is 40 minutes of audiobook. So I'm going to do my best to get through, but it's going to cover some pretty meaty stuff. The chapter is called Will Anarchist Communism Work? So we're really getting into the theory part, the theory section of the book. He's laid all the groundwork that he cares to, given all the background information, and now he's getting into the thesis question. What is communist anarchism? So we will start in with that pretty soon. Before we do get started, though, I do want to mention that on Facebook, I'm part of a live stream and content creator community, or collective, I guess is a better term for it. And we are trying to use our collective resources to boost each other's reach and audience, and just have a kind of a one-stop place for everyone to come and check out cool leftist content. And so that is at Left Signal Boost TV on Facebook. I'll put the thing in the chat right now. So definitely go check that out. Give a like, follow, and you'll get several live streams a week that you'll be notified about, including this one. But yeah, we're accepting applications for more content creators. So whether you do videos or podcasts or live streams, or even things like art, music, if you're an author, whatever it is that you do, as long as it's promoting leftism, you can also be a part of our collective too, and we can just help each other out all together. So if that's of interest to you or someone you might know, just follow that link right there, facebook.com/leftsignalboosttv, and we'll get you set up as an admin so you can stream right to the page and post whatever sort of stuff you like. All right. I think that takes care of all the housekeeping. Let's get into this chapter. There we go.
Chapter 22. Will Communist Anarchism Work?
Oops. Let me put the closed captioning on. So we're into Chapter 22. Will Communist Anarchism Work?
As we have seen in the preceding chapter, no life can be free and secure, harmonious and satisfactory, unless it is built on the principles of justice and fair play. The first requirement of justice is equal liberty and opportunity. Under government and exploitation, there can neither be liberty nor equal opportunity, hence all the evils and troubles of present-day society. Communist anarchism is based on the understanding of this incontrovertible truth. It is founded on the principle of non-invasiveness and non-coercion, in other words, on liberty and opportunity. Life on such a basis fully satisfies the demands of justice. You are to be entirely free and everyone else is to enjoy equal liberty, which means no one has a right to compel or force another. For coercion of any kind is interference with your liberty.
So as a general principle, that's definitely a good thing. You don't want to have any one person dominating another. Of course, there are going to be circumstances where that's impossible. If there arises someone who does wish to dominate others and will not stop just by, telling them to stop, then coercion and force may be necessary. But it's all with the idea of balancing everybody's rights. So you don't have the right to control other people, and that right extends as far as and that right applies to everyone else. They don't have a right to control you either. And if anybody tries to take away that right from other people, then the community as a whole has the right to use whatever force necessary to stop you from doing that, or stop that one person from taking it from the many. So you have to have a balancing principle in order for that sort of thing to work.
Similarly, equal opportunity is the heritage of all. Monopoly and the private ownership of the means of existence are therefore eliminated as an abridgment of the equal opportunity of all. If we keep in mind this simple principle of equal liberty and opportunity, we shall be able to solve the questions involved in building a society of communist anarchism. Politically, then, man will recognize no authority which can force or coerce him. Government will be abolished. Economically, he will permit...
So again, saying government will be abolished. That really depends on what you mean by government. If you just mean the state, as in a separate entity from the people that is tasked with deciding laws, justice, and then enforcing those things, maybe so. If you mean any sort of collective getting together and deciding of rules and also enforcing those rules whatsoever, well, then I don't see that as possible. The way that I conceive of government is it's anytime you have a group of people with mutually decided upon rules. So that could be a family, that could be just a friend group. Pretty much every interaction you have in your day, there's going to be some rules at play. Now, most of the time, you don't really need to be reminded of that. It's not as though every person you walk up to, they have to say, "Well, by the way, don't hit me. And by the way, don't steal my stuff." These are just implied as being part of a society, you know. But nonetheless, they are in place. There's a social contract. It's usually referred to as the social contract that one has with everyone else that they interact with in society. So the idea that we could ever get away with, do away with all of that, I don't see how. I don't see how. There has to be some sort of rules in order for any complex grouping of people to get along and interact with one another. So, yeah, little caveat there. He says government will be abolished. I don't know that that's entirely possible.
No exclusive possession of the sources of life in order to preserve his opportunity of free access.
Okay, so he's talking about the means of production. No one can have a monopoly on all of the things that you need to continue your life. That is possible, for sure. There are many sorts of systems that have been conceived where there's equal sharing among workers or just among the people at large, usually through a governmental system, to make it so there's no private monopoly over any sort of thing that people need for their lives, which I would say is good, no matter which form it takes. You don't want to have people being able to lord it over everyone and say, "Do what I say, or I can take away your housing. Do what I say, or you might starve. Do what I say, or, you know, hope that you don't get any sort of illness because you'll die in the streets, because I won't help you with my medical care," or what have you. So all these things that people need to continue their life, You shouldn't have one person or even a handful of people controlling all of any of those aspects. So plenty of schemes in place. You could have worker cooperatives. That's a common one that's brought up these days. And that's just the idea where on the big issues of the way a business is run, things are decided democratically amongst all the workers. So things like pay, things like compensation, workplace conditions, scheduling, and then to a certain extent, the direction of the company, what things are invested in, what money is set aside and for what purposes for the future, for future endeavors, all these sorts of things. You still might have managers, you still might have room for expertise leading the way, but the important things that affect everyone in the company are decided democratically. So that's one system. There's another system. We'll get into, I guess, the more state socialist form of this next. So there's another way of doing it where you elect representatives to the government. They are recallable at any time. So they're basically only there to do your bidding. It's just a recognition that direct democracy at any scale eventually becomes unworkable. You can't get the entirety of a nation together in a physical space, even with modern technology. It's not as though you could have a Twitch stream with, 300 million people on it and have everyone have a chance to have their say about every single issue. That's just impossible. So a representative republic, a representative form of democracy is then used to represent your will, but it's supposed to be actually the will of the people. It's not politicians just deciding on their own what they feel like doing. It is them asking their constituency, whether that's, at the lowest level, a village or a neighborhood or whatever. They ask their constituency how to vote in a certain issue. And then the people tell them.
What's the punishment if they don't do it?
They can be recalled. So Amanda from across the room, you probably couldn't hear. She said, "What's the punishment if they don't do what you say?" They get recalled. They're the consequence. Whatever. Same thing. They can be recalled at any time. So anytime enough of people in the constituency, say it's 50% of the people, feel they're not being representative. They hold a vote of no confidence, and if their representative does not withstand that vote, then they are recalled and someone else is put in their place. So it is supposed to be, in theory, control from the bottom, but still a representative form of democracy. And then at the same time, all those elected representatives direct the various endeavors of the country. You have
the representative silences the village.
Okay, but what do you mean? What if they silence the village?
What if they're like paying people off to be like, don't hold a recall for me, just let me do this?
Oh, so are you actually coming on stream so you
Am I
can?
allowed?
Yeah, but you should ask your question when you're closer to the mic then, so people can actually hear.
Sorry, I gotta put the beverage bar away.
Okay.
Back in a second.
So anyway, your elected representatives then also direct the way the economy goes. It's a centralized kind of command and control sort of economy, or at least it tends to be. There's various forms of what's been described as communism, although that's not really even true communism yet, because you're still ostensibly using a market. You're still paying people in credits at the very least. It's just that it's a lot more egalitarian and it's a lot more democratic, and you have a lot more control from the bottom. But anyway, that's state socialism. Then there is libertarian municipalism, which is a concept that I'm learning about. I've just come to this concept, but it's very intriguing to me so far. And from what I can understand so far, it seems to be that same sort of system, but from the bottom up, instead of electing these representatives and then having all the decisions coming top down. You basically only have part control over your local area, whether that's a neighborhood or a village or whatever, your smallest unit. That's what you have control over, and that's what you have a say in. So all of the endeavors that happen within that neighborhood, we'll just say neighborhood, that district, maybe that's even a better term, are decided collectively by the people that live there. So if there's economic activity, it's decided by the people locally. No one from the top has any say. And then voluntarily, your district chooses to confederate with other districts, probably starting with the ones nearby you, but then branching out further and further. So it's the same sort of system that Lenin described in State and Revolution. It's just from control from the other end. And it also has more of an emphasis on voluntarism. So you're voluntarily associating your group with, or your group is voluntarily associating with other groups for common ends. So anyway, this is all to say that there are plenty of schemes possible where people have control over the means of production, and it can't just be hoarded by a group of elites, in theory. So what was your question?
I forgot.
What if someone pays off people? That's what you're
What
saying?
if the representative buys the public?
Well, as Lenin conceived of it, all elected representatives only make a workman's wage. So they would never have enough money to do that sort of thing.
Ah, okay. I didn't hear that part. Also, before we get started, before I decide for sure that I'm going to stay, It's very hot in here.
Oh, if you want to open the window, go ahead, but I can't reach it from here.
I'm just checking before
Yeah,
I do.
yeah, definitely do it. It's very hot in here. Our lovely landlords.
Oh no, they really care about us.
Yeah,
They just need us
they
to
super care
sit
about
with it
us.
for a week.
They complained that we had our window open the other day, and we told them this is not. Yeah, I'm getting to it. This is now the third time that we've told them our thermostat does not control the heat in our apartment. We haven't said it literally like six.
I think I'm gonna push the window.
You need to push it up as high as you can.
I'm trying, but it looks cracked in several places.
Okay. 1 second. We got some window technical difficulties.
I'm sorry.
All right. It's not. It's
I don't wanna go
it's
to
a
the
piece.
emergency room
It is a piece
today.
of plexiglass, so it's not going to shatter. Don't. If you need me to get up, don't stand right where I need to be.
Sorry, community. I'm not trying to be a pill.
There we go.
Should we just put the fan there and not turn it on
Why would the fan being there help?
to keep it from going down? Because it's not stable.
It is stable.
No, it's not.
It's stable.
You're just gonna end up putting it there anyway.
It's fine. Please don't put the fan
turn it
there.
on. I won't turn it on.
It's not going to fall down. Anyway. So while I do disagree with Berkman on the idea that we can do away with government entirely, I think we can have a system of government that limits people's individual power to the point where no one can hoard resources that are vital for life, at the very least, and
No dragons.
use that to extract favors and concessions out of the general public, basically lord it over them. Let's get back. Let's see if we have any. Oh, we have tons of comments. John is saying hello to you.
Hi, John.
Yeah, the vote of no confidence we definitely need more of. We don't really have that in our American system either. There's not a real good way to do recall elections. And as we've seen, they tried to recall the Wisconsin governor in like the past decade, and people are just like, oh well, even though he's screwing over the teachers unions, I don't want to recall him because what if they just recall the governor that I like instead? So he withstood his recall election. But yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, John. John says, anarchism is always the core to my being free and desiring freedom for others. Yeah, and that's how I view anarchism as well. It's kind of the maximum freedom for the maximum number of people, balanced by everyone else's freedom, of course.
It's like you're right to do whatever you want. Oh, sorry.
Right. Yeah. Right to do whatever you want, as long as you're not diminishing others to do
Stops
the
at
same.
the tip of my nose.
Yeah. Yeah.
And-
Right to swing your arms ends at the tip of your neighbor's nose. That sort of principle. I think that's a pretty easy to understand and easy to get behind sort of principle. Did we try replacing the thermostat ourselves? It's a very old thermostat. It's wired into the wall. There may be some way to do it, but I have just not. Apparently, my dad has suggested the same thing. He seems to think that it's only a few wires you got to connect, and we can just get our own thermostat, and it would work. But I haven't looked into it yet.
If we did it, it comes with us when we leave because I'm not paying to.
Oh, of course.
Glamorize.
Yeah, just like all our shelves are coming down when we leave. We'll fill in the holes. We're not leaving any enhancements or improvements behind.
Maybe we can have them over when the couch is here, then they can come see our new couch.
Who?
Your parents.
Oh, my parents. Well, I don't know. We were talking about my parents. Why would
you were just talking about your dad. Never mind.
Yeah, a couple subjects ago. Let's see. Did I miss anything else? Oh,
but John, couldn't you just imagine how much less of a legal system we would need? Like how much less complicated it would become because those people would be so much of an outlier and so few and far between. They really wouldn't be the kind of problem that they are now.
Right. Yeah. If we're providing for everyone's needs, which pretty much every leftist system, when you get down to it, the idea is to provide everyone's basic needs at the very least, like even the kind of the bare bones sort of market socialism. Still, the idea is to decommodify needs, so take them out of the control of market forces, so that everyone has access to them. Oh wow, lots of followers. Thanks for the follows. To Sneed for you and Anti-Fax. I'm getting mass followed. Oh boy. Well, I'm glad I have the throttle on, so it's at least go. Oh boy. I wonder if there's going to be a bot follow. But at least I have the throttle on, so it's going to be 10 minutes before Graper. Oh boy. I am going to change my settings then. So thanks for the follow, y'all. What I'm going to do, though, is make it so you can't comment for a while. Because if you're going to troll, I'm going to make you work for it. Yeah, it does look like a bot spam, doesn't it? Let's see. What is that under?
Messages. Scroll back up.
What?
Messages, block terms and phrases.
No, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, I have it set so I think you have to wait 10 minutes from the time you follow before you chat. So we have email verification. Let's turn that on. Oh, I already did have that on. All chatters must have a verified email, so at least we have that. Verified phone number, I don't think that's going to help. Follower only mode. Okay. So we're going to put it on to 30 minutes. So if you all bots are going to stay around for 30 minutes before you comment, I guess I'm not going to stop you. But geez. Yep. Yeah. Okay, we did have one comment back there that I wanted to bring up. So DJ Stephanie says, I think freedom is an oversimplification. Anarchism for me is community. Neighbors supporting neighbors, cooperatives. Absolutely. I didn't mean to reduce it entirely to freedom. I just meant to say that that's part of it. It's freedom, it's democracy, it is agency, it is having choice in your life. And yes, it is building those community bonds and doing things collectively as a community. I'm very much on the collectivist end of anarchism. I think there's a lot that I can respect about people that are very individualist anarchists. These would be the types who would say squat buildings, dumpster dive. Basically, for them, anarchy is living as close to your values as possible. Like you remember our old roommate, Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
He was what I would consider kind of the prototypical individualist anarchist. So he could not conceive of he cannot come to terms with having to give in to the system that he opposed so much. So he doesn't work a job. He does contribute.
Doesn't have an ID.
Doesn't have an ID. Doesn't have a social security number. He works with a mutual aid group. That's basically his big contribution to his family. That, and also doing child care is a poor way of putting it, but he's a stay-at-home. He's a stay-at-home parent for his child. But at the same time, the only reason that he's able to make it at all without having to say squat an abandoned building is that his wife goes out. Oh, they're actually not married. His girlfriend goes out and works. So she's the only one who actually has income. But he is what I would consider to be an individual anarchist. It's the focus on yourself and living your values as close to as possible. And I have respect for that. But I think ultimately, those sorts of people are never going to make systemic change. It's only going to be through collective action, through building dual power, and participating in the sort of systems that we want to see in the world, building up one another's through community action, that we're ever actually going to make any sort of systemic change. So I'm very much on the opposite end of that spectrum. I believe much more in collective anarchism, at least as I would define it. And there's probably other definitions for it. But let's see. We can pull that away now. Thanks for the comment, though, Stephanie. I do appreciate that. NCOM, SciComm, good to see you back again. Yeah, this was probably the book that was most. Whoa, we have 22 people watching. I'm assuming they're mostly bots, but that's fine. Exactly, Stephanie. It does sound more like mere existing and not thriving in anarchism. Right. I want to build up those mutual aid networks. So it's great that my friend does some of that mutual aid. Like he and his crew, they work with local food co-ops. They get all the stuff that's, coming close to its sell-by date. And then they just drive around in a bus and distribute it to people. It's really cool. It's a great system that they have going. But that's basically where it ends. They don't really do any community organizing. I don't think Charlie even votes. He just basically doesn't participate in any other in the system as much as possible. And I think we have to look at a bunch of tools and keep them on the table, and not just focus on, being, pure in action. But yeah, back to your comment, NCOM, SciComm. Yeah, this book, What is Communist Anarchism, was the #1 book that was recommended to me as a good primer to anarcho-communism, or just anarchism in general. And I'm definitely liking it so far, but I am finding Berkman to be more of an individual anarchist, which has its merits, but again, I disagree with as a overall strategy. Yeah, I agree, and make no mistake. There's sorry, I should put it in the context of your question. DJ Stephanie says, I don't know that voting is that important unless we're talking about harm reduction. Right. So when I say voting can be an important tool, what I'm mostly referring to is, yes, putting good people in places so at least horrible people can't use that concentration of power to do worse things. But also, especially at the local level, there's a lot of ordinances that could get in the way of you doing what you want to do. Ordinances like prohibition of feeding homeless people in the park, prohibition against raising chickens, or growing a garden in your front yard, or harvesting rainwater. There are definitely states, the drier states in the US, where there are a lot of ordinances against what you can do with water that comes onto your land. There are ordinances in a lot of cities, like I believe Mankato is one of those, Mankato, Minnesota. There's an ordinance that I think it was you can't have 3 or more unrelated people living in a house together or something like that. There's a lot of local ordinances that can
There's a
really
huge
get in your way.
college in that town. How does that even work?
I don't think it's enforced that much, but it's one of those things that's like, even if it's not enforced now, if your landlord really hated you, they could just say, "Oh, wait a minute, you guys aren't related? Get out," or something like that, you know.
Mhm.
It's one of those things that can be just, kept in your back pocket until you need it, or until the government needs it. You see, I always thought Brickman was more collectivist. Well, I'm getting an individualist flavor from him. I could be wrong, and we're definitely gonna dig more into what he thinks about in this chapter. But so far, it seems that his take is mostly living your life in an anarchist way. But I could be wrong about that. Anyway, let's get back into the chapter.
Can I have headphones?
Oh, sorry about that. Oh yeah, look at that. Now we're back down to only 3 people on Twitch. So that was probably a big bot swarm. But anyway, let's move on to the chapter now.
Monopoly of land, private ownership of the machinery of production, distribution, and communication can therefore not be tolerated under anarchy. Opportunity to use what everyone needs in order to live must be free for all. In a nutshell, then, the meaning of communist anarchism is this: the abolition of government, of coercive authority, and all its agencies, and joint ownership, which means free and equal participation in the general work and welfare.
I just want to emphasize again, in any system, there's going to be some level of coercion. If you have a system of anarchy, you are forcing people to not act as capitalists. You are forcing people to not be able to own the means of production themselves at the exclusion of everyone else. That is still force. If someone tried to do that, collectively you would stop them as a community. So there is force implicit in the system. There's force inherent in the system. If someone was going around and hitting people or robbing people of their personal property, you would probably stop them. You might have more kinder, gentle ways of doing it than our current law enforcement system, but still, at some point, force is going to be applied. If a conquering army is coming out on the horizon, you're probably going to organize a defense against it militarily, even if it's a confederated one where each military unit has their own autonomy and they're just coordinating their efforts together for mutual defense. You're still talking about using guns to defend yourselves. That is force too. So just important to keep that in mind as we think about this, because there's the tendency to think of this as kind of an idealistic, head in the clouds sort of system that doesn't really map onto the way that humans work with one another very well. So I think it's important to kind of set those definitions out and, define force in a way that does show that it will need to be used on occasion at the very least. Now, probably much less, as Amanda said earlier, just by providing for everyone's needs, you're already eliminating the need for poverty-based or poverty-motivated crime. So a lot of violent crime is just going to go away. A lot of theft is just going to go away if that's the case, if you're actually enacting this sort of system. There's still going to be those edge cases, though.
And if those powers that be that are supposed to protect the general public could shift their methods, like, instead of being like coming in guns blazing, like, okay, I'm going to give you a choice. You're either going to do this on your own volition, or I'm going to intervene and I'm going to help you, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to make a decision.
Right.
Like,
yeah, that would definitely be an example of using less force. It's just the minimum amount needed, which is good, but it's still, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do this. That still is a threat of force.
But also still giving them time to make the decision on their own.
Sure. Yeah, you can definitely make things a lot better than they are now. All I'm trying to say is there's still implicit in all of this, if you don't get along with society, if you don't follow the rules that we've all agreed to, we're going to have to use force against you to excise you from the community or isolate you somehow, or in very extreme cases, perhaps even kill someone. If someone's just going on if there's a school shooter situation and they are just not going to stop or something like that, it may be that force is necessary. There may be extreme cases still where that happens. Now, hopefully in this anarchist society, we have healthcare available to everyone, and that includes mental health, so that people can work through their frustrations in a more constructive way. So it doesn't get to the point where they somehow believe it's okay to end the lives of a bunch of innocent children. But you never know. There could be people that just lack so much empathy that they are willing to hurt people on a massive scale, even in that society. Okay, let's continue on.
You say that anarchy will secure economic equality, remarks your friend. Does that mean equal pay for all? It does, or what amounts to the same. Equal participation in the public welfare. Because as we already know, labor is social. No man can create all by himself, by his own efforts. Now then, if labor is social, it stands to reason that the results of it, the wealth produced, must also be social, belong collectively. No person can therefore justly lay claim to the exclusive ownership of the social wealth. It is to be enjoyed by all alike. But why not give to each according to the value of his work, you ask? Because there is no way in which value can be measured. That is the difference between value and price. Value is what a thing is worth, while price is what it can be sold or bought for in the market. What a thing is worth, no one can really tell. Political economists claim that the value of a commodity is the amount of labor required to produce it, of social necessary labor, as Marx says. But
as Marx says. Got a lot of comments here, so we'll get to some of those before we continue on. Let's see. Where have we left off? Well, let's see. Is the prevention of coercion itself a form of coercion? I would say that it can be. If you're restraining someone from hitting another person, you are physically stopping them. You are. It is of course in the name of balancing everyone's rights amongst in relation to everyone else's rights, but you're still physically restraining them. So there is a case to be made. You are certainly limiting their bodily autonomy in that moment, but it's for a greater purpose. I would still call that coercion. I think it's still important to recognize that it is initiation of force for an end. Yeah, that's all I would say about that. Do you have anything? Okay. Yeah, so there are, and that's true, you say, ancoms.com. There are justified and unjustified forms of violence. Absolutely. Unjustified violence would be inherently coercive. But I'm not sure justified violence, using force to prevent unjustified violence, counts as coercive in nature. That's fair. That could be a way that you define that. I just worry that I want to keep in mind that it's not just going to be as though, how do I phrase this? The idea that people just get along is something that is used to kind of criticize anarchists. People, it's always the human nature thing. Humans are naturally violent and domineering and all these sorts of things. So you trying to come up with this utopian system where no one hurts one another and no coercion is ever initiated, that just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's so therefore I think it's important to keep that in mind, that sometimes force is going to be necessary, even if it's for a common good, because it's just more a realistic way of looking at it. It is force. It is ostensibly, hopefully, for a common good or for a higher purpose. But to just say, I'm doing it for the greater good, that can also get into murky territory. If you have, say, a coal operation, let's use that for example. If you have a coal mining operation where you have a lot of people that are working on this coal operation, they're mining coal every day, it is doing horrible damage to the environment, both in terms of putting its waste into the local waterways and also in the final transporting and burning of the products that it makes. You might say that blowing up that mining operation is for the greater good. They are, and you would be right to say that mining operation is initiating violence against everybody and everything, violence against nature. So, if we're going to say that it's only coercive if you're doing it for a bad purpose, well, is that not then coercive to end the lives of a whole bunch of people? I would say that's still coercion, even though you have a higher purpose in mind. So I think it's important to not get too far away from that, and just acknowledge that sometimes force is to be used, and sometimes people are going to be forced to do things that they don't want to do in the name of the greater good. Um, all right, yeah, lots of comments. Thank you all for that. I'll try to get to as many as I can. Although this is a long chapter, so I don't want to. If I do skip over your comment, it's just in the name of moving things along, because we got quite a ways to go still. I mean, likewise, a war of defense. Would you say that that's not coercive just because you're fighting to protect your own community? From the other side, from the other point of view, they might be destroying a great evil in the world. They might think that by defeating you, they are retaking control of a better system. And again, that's where it gets murky, is because one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. There's no absolute good. There's no absolute evil in the world. It's all about perspective and what ideals you're even striving towards. So I would still stand by that. It's important to acknowledge coercion as what it is, even when it's for a greater good. Yeah. You're right. DJ Stephanie says exploitation is required in a capitalist society. Now, exploitation, that is potentially something that we can do away with. If we provide the needs for everybody, regardless of what they're doing, what they're so-called, quote unquote, contributing to society, then yeah, we can give them real choice in their lives to decide what they want to do with it. If they just want to sit around and play video games the rest of their life, they're entitled to do so. As long as enough people make the choice to contribute towards securing food and shelter and health care and transportation, all those necessities of life again, then we can give people real choice in their life. And I think that's a good thing. So in that sort of a society, enough people are going to choose to contribute in ways that secure food for everybody else, secure shelter for everybody else, that sort of thing. I don't think we ever need to worry about that. So as long as everyone is doing the thing that they want to do and everything is getting done, then yeah, I think we can do away with exploitation. It's a good point there. So John says, in slavery, the individual power is the freedom to enslave others. Right. And that's the important distinction between Relative rights is my right to do something as long as it doesn't diminish your right, versus absolute rights is, do I have 0 right to do things, or do I have 100% right to do things? I have 100% right to wave right now. No one can tell me I can stop wave. I have to stop waving. And if you did, I wouldn't have to. Now, could I make Amanda wave? I mean, I probably could force her to, but do I have a right to? I don't think so. I don't think so. So, because she has the right to control her body, and I have the right to control my body, we each have balanced and equal rights. Now, if I'm trying to use my body to control her body, I have now violated that balance of power. So even though I don't have the right, I don't have the absolute right to make Amanda do whatever she wants with her body, for the greater good, we decide that it's better to have as much relative rights as everybody else. So that's a very important distinction. So by doing, you're right, by doing away with slavery, we got rid of the right of people to enslave one another. By doing away with feudalism, we did away with the divine right of kings to rule. And the divine right of, well, I mean, we didn't completely do away with lordship, because landlords is more than just a souvenir from a bygone era. There really is a lot in common with the way that the lord and serf system used to work out. It's I own this property, so that I am entitled to a fraction of the economic activity that takes place there. Or in the case of rental housing, the economic activity that sustains the person that lives there.
Slavery is not gone either. It's just called the penal system now.
Well, that's an important point too. So yeah, we never completely do away with any system that we've gotten past, or at least we haven't yet.
It just evolves.
But it definitely is diminished quite a bit. Chattel slavery, we can at least say, is done away with. There is no more hereditary slavery. You can't legally own another person, even if you can, through the prison system, force them to work in certain places. They still have some rights. So absolute slavery has been done away with.
Fair enough.
But again, so getting back to the things that we have stopped in the name of greater freedom. So there's no more lords and serfs. I can't just call myself, Duke of the Hill, and then extract taxes from all of my neighbors because I'm the Duke and I'm entitled to this land. I don't have the right to do that. Right. So capitalism is still a form of exploitation, though. So all we're talking about doing when we move into any sort of socialist system is doing away with the exploitation of capitalism, doing away with someone's right to take their workers' profit just because they're an owner. That's really all that's taking place. You no longer have the absolute right to someone else, the fruit of someone else's labor. And for all the complaining that capitalists do about how taxes are taking away theft and taking away my right to make profit and all this stuff, if they really looked at things honestly, they would see that initially the only way that they have that money in the first place is that they stole from their employees. It's just that it happens to be legal to steal from your employees, as long as it fits the terms of the employment contract and it's above minimum wage and meets very minimal requirements. You can take everything else.
I mean, Texas kind of robbed the middle class, as in they bear most of the brunt. I'm not saying I have that much of a problem with paying taxes. I just don't like how it's done. Like the upper 1% doesn't pay anything. They could definitely afford to. They don't.
Yeah. And if our politicians were not, in their pocket, then they're smart enough to make rules that could capture any sort of income that they get.
But they won't, because it doesn't benefit them.
Because it doesn't benefit them, and because they are dependent on them to win campaigns, because it takes money to win campaigns. But you're all very, very correct in saying that our current system is, it may be a kinder, gentler form of slavery where we can at least choose our own master. But for most people, in terms of freedom and actually having choice in their life, it's not much different. It's not much different. So we do need to be careful about language again, and not downplay the true horrors of real actual slavery. But we can compare it on a gradient. I think that's appropriate. So you have chattel slavery, you have classical, I guess we'll just call it classical slavery, like was experienced in Greece and Rome.
I shouldn't have laughed at that. I'm sorry. It just
No,
made
that's
me
okay.
think of classically somebody else.
Yeah,
And
well, you know, and all the times that these, you know, whatever they call themselves, classical libertarian or classical liberals are hearkening back to, yeah, they do include things like slavery and stuff like that. So yeah, so then there's classical slavery where slaves still have some rights. You can't just murder your slaves. Eventually, a lot of them end up becoming family members. This is how things happened in antiquity. Then you have let's see. Then you have indentured servitude, where you're basically it's basically contract slavery.
John just hit on that.
Indentured, yeah, there we go. Indentured servitude. It's not quite. It's kind of contracted slavery, but it has a period of time that it lasts for, and then it ends, and you get all your rights back. And still, they don't have absolute right to your body and to do with what they will. There are still rights that indentured servants have, but it's on that continuum there. So then we move a little bit further, and we have, say, the land tenant arrangement, where you have a wealthy landlord that owns a bunch of land, and you as a farmer agree to give a large portion of whatever you make to them. It's not so much different than actual serfdom. In fact, in the way that it had worked out in America, it basically was no different than serfdom. You ended up with nothing extra. People ended up starving to death on this farm tenant system. So then you have that, and it's not quite as bad as the other forms, but it's on the same spectrum. So then you move up a little bit more into serfdom, where you have a lot of rights as a peasant. You were expected to be protected by your lord from invading forces, although that didn't always happen. The lords tended to, put on a feast once in a while for their peasants, their serfs. And you basically decided how much you worked. As long as you met the quota of products by the end of the year, you're fine. You can choose when to work. So in some ways, you would have more freedom than your average person has today under debt peonage. So you have a little bit more freedom in that. So then you move it up even further into the original kind of unregulated capitalism, where basically swindling occurs all the time. They can just decide not to pay you for fractions of an hour, and it's perfectly legal. And yet they can kind of coerce you into working extra. You basically don't have any rights as a worker. So that's kind of a very bare bones. It would be the freest form of capitalism from the point of view of the capitalists. So you have that. So really, a lot of miserable lives for the poor under that as well. And all of these gradients here so far, it sucks to be a poor person. There's just no two ways about it. You have very little choice. You have very little autonomy. But at least with this form of capitalism, if you really don't like your master, you can choose a different one, which is a kind of choice, but it's not really worth that much if all the masters are equally cruel. So you have that. So and then you move up into a more regulatory form of capitalism. You could even call it neoliberalism, where there may be some very bare bones social programs, there may be some regulation, but for the most part, it's all the laws and all of the enforcement of the laws is for the benefit of the people at the top still. So a little bit better. You're not going to get completely screwed, but you're going to get screwed just a little bit of screwing. So then you move into a more social safety net. You could say it's the Scandinavian model. We're getting now towards social democracy, where there's lots of social programs, and they take all the sting out of, in theory, they take all the sting out of capitalism, and they give it back to you in terms of social programs, in terms of just wealth redistribution. That tends to be how places like Finland do it, where they just tax the rich really hard and they give it back to the poor.
Too hot in here.
I'm sorry. You can always listen in from the other room, though, too.
No, it's scary.
All right. Well, thank you for being on, Amanda. I definitely appreciate it. So you have that. We're getting in towards more like a social democracy. Plenty of social safety nets. So in this, you have a lot more freedom. The worker for the first time actually has some freedom. Unions tend to be more prevalent in these sort of societies. You have at least something that you can leverage to get the things that you need and not just have to take whatever an employer throws at you. And so at that point, we kind of reach the end of capitalism. To go any further past that is to getting into actual socialism. So socialism is different than all the rest, different than everything that came before it, because it does away with that exploiter-exploited relationship. There's no more slave and master. There's no more lord and serf. There's no more owner and worker. We're getting rid of all that. And at the very least, in like the very bare bones market socialism, if you have an endeavor, it cannot be a capitalist endeavor. It has to be where the workers, every worker in the organization is also a part owner and has equal voting for at least things like, benefits, pay, scheduling, these sorts of things, the very important things that impact workers in their work. So at that point, we've finally arrived in what I would consider to be the left. Everything before that is on the right side of the economic spectrum, because everything on the right involves natural hierarchies, involves one person exploiting their advantage or using their advantage to exploit those that are in a less advantageous position. And so left, being on the left, by contrast, means that at least we don't have that anymore. That doesn't solve all the problems of the world. You could still have worker cooperatives that are, exploiting nature or exploiting people in other countries through the products that they rely on, that they get that they get cheaply from, sweatshop labor or just regular capitalist labor. So it doesn't do away with all exploitation, but at least for the country that enacts it, it would do away with economic exploitation at a minimum. And then from there, you can kind of keep on moving leftward till you finally get to something like anarchism or end-state communism, where you have a classless, moneyless, no more hierarchy in society, and people just kind of help each other out and secure the needs and desires of society collectively. And that's the final. It's not really an end state, because there's certainly probably going to be things beyond that point. But right now, that's about as far as humanity has dreamed. So anyway, that was a lot of talking. Let's see what else I've missed here. So Ancom Sacom brings up a good point. The human nature argument is one that I dislike because it doesn't actually make sense. Human nature is far more malleable. True. Fungible. True. Even ineffable than those. I think ineffable. I could be wrong about that term. I think ineffable means unchangeable. Than those arguments suggest. I think that's true. But also, I think an even stronger argument to add on to that point is that if you believe that people with enough power are just going to use it to exploit one another, why would you want a system that rewards people that, destroy others in order to get into a privileged position? Why would you want a system where the most ruthless worker can work their way up and then rule everybody else? It just seems like, it's like a big psychopath magnet that you're putting at the top of every company at that point. Because the people that are most willing to destroy and step on everybody else on their rise up are also going to be rewarded by it. So if you believe that human nature, if you have a very dim view of human nature, you should instead want a system where there's as few concentrations of power as possible, so that there's not that opportunity for really bad people to amass power and lord it over everyone else. So even if you don't believe in a good society, anarchism, communism, socialism, still better systems than ones where exploitation is just built in. So ineffable represents the inability to be described in words. Okay. Then I was mistaken about the definition of that word, which I think is the idea of human nature. Very well. I have never yet been given a description of an inherent nature to humanity. That is true. Yeah, I just read David Graeber's book, The Dawn of Everything, and he made a pretty good argument how there's no one society that inevitably develops in humanity. There are societies that, in fact, model themselves to be the antithesis of their neighboring societies. They're like, oh, those people, they're exploiting one another. They have a king who they worship. I don't want to be like that. We're going to do everything completely opposite. It's very intentional, and it's very much different despite having similar geographic and material conditions. So there's always room for intentional building in any sort of society. It's not all just a response to material conditions. It's not all predetermined, the course of society. Cool. All right, I think we're going to move on in the chapter.
Evidently, it is not just the standard of measurement. Suppose the carpenter worked 3 hours to make a kitchen chair, while the surgeon took only half an hour to perform an operation that saved your life. The amount of labor used determines the value then, as the chair is worth more than your life. This is obvious nonsense, of course. Even should you count in the years of study and practice the surgeon needed to make him capable of performing the operation, how are you going to decide what an hour of operating is worth? The carpenter and the mason also had to be trained before they could do their work properly, but you don't figure in the years of apprenticeship when you contract for some work with them.
You could. I'm going to back it up just a little bit, because that was a long monologue, I guess, for lack of a better term. So we're going to back it up just a little bit so we can get back into this idea.
Value is what a thing is worth, while price is what it can be sold or bought for in the market. What a thing is worth, no one can really tell. Political economists claim that the value of a commodity is the amount of labor required to produce it.
So this is kind of in contrast to Marx's idea of the labor theory of value, where the more labor you put into something, the more it is worth. But he's gonna have some objections to having that kind of one size fits all way of estimating value.
Of social necessary labor, as Marx says. But evidently, it is not just the standard of measurement. Suppose the carpenter worked 3 hours to make a kitchen chair, while the surgeon took only half an hour to perform an operation that saved your life. The amount of labor used determines the value then, as the chair is worth more than your life. This is obvious nonsense, of course. Even should you count in the years of study and practice the surgeon needed to make him capable of performing the operation, how are you going to decide what an hour of operating is worth?
And this could be applied to any of life's necessities. how can you determine how much the amount of food that you need to live on is worth? To you, it's worth everything. If you don't have enough food to live on, you will die. That's just pretty simple. So how do you estimate the value of that? How could you put a price on your life? The same thing is true of medicine. How can you put a price on getting a particular operation that saves your life, or getting medicine that saves your life? And how can you estimate that value just by the amount of labor that went into it? So it's a good critique. But to be fair to Marx, he is trying to. He doesn't think you can do away with money all at once, and anarchists tend to be more oriented towards just doing away with money, getting rid of the concept of money altogether, leaping right to that end stage sort of communism, for these reasons, that it may be a better way of estimating than what we have now, where the amount of money a particular position is worth is pretty arbitrary. You can say it's all based on the market, but I mean, even that assumes that the market has some way of divining, that yes, an hour of childcare should be 100 times less than an hour of stock trading from a broker that knows what they're doing. Or an hour of Jeff Bezos's time should be worth $5 million, whatever he makes per hour. I'm sure it's some ridiculous sum like that, because the things that his labor that he is doing is just so difficult that he alone on earth can do it, which means it's worth whatever the market will bear, versus an hour of a school teacher teaching reading to a child, something that they absolutely need to function in society, that without it, it's a really what I'm trying to say is a very arbitrary way, the way that we do things now, just leave everything up to the market. Because if it was up to the market, I mean, for one thing, most children wouldn't be educated at all, because most people wouldn't be able to afford private school. If we did away with public schools entirely, that's it. The only educated people, well, for the most part, the only educated people will be the ones that could afford private school. And that's if we left it all up to the market. So clearly, we've at least decided that the market can't decide everything, but the stuff that it still decides is pretty arbitrary, and doesn't necessarily map on to it's the utility of the thing. You could spend $15,000 for an exclusive pair of shoes that will last you far less than a really good pair of work boots. So in terms of its utility, I mean, you might say the utility is the social capital, but how do you measure social capital? It's a very amorphous term as well. So what Marx wanted was the labor theory of value, where at least we can get to the point where we're tying compensation to amount of work done. But then Berkman is not fine with even that. He's saying we have to go even beyond that point, because how do you compare? It's literally comparing apples to oranges. How do you compare the value of an apple versus the value of an orange? I mean, you can look at the nutritional profile, you can look at the availability, the shippability, the shelf storage, all these sorts of things. But if we're just using labor as a stand-in, how long does it take to pick an apple versus an orange? It might be the same time. So what, is it the same price? Even if one thing is harder to grow? I mean, yeah, he's what he's saying is basically things are just so complicated. So much goes into each thing. And this goes all the way back to Kropotkin's conception of things, where he too thought that so much goes into everything. And then when you look at when you telescope out history and you look at the generations of people that had to build up the knowledge of doing any one particular endeavor, and you calculate that in, how do you put that into the value of things? So Kropotkin, and it sounds like Berkman too, just said, to hell with it. We all are the inheritors of the combined knowledge and efforts of countless generations. So when it comes down to it, we're all deserving of all this stuff. Kropotkin put it as all for all. And I'm getting the feeling that Berkman would not disagree with that one bit. So assigning value to this thing or that thing is silly and arbitrary, and instead we should just focus on meeting people's needs. So it's a needs-based economy rather than a compensation-based economy, or even a labor-based economy.
The carpenter and the mason also had to be trained before they could do their work properly, but you don't figure in the years of apprenticeship when you contract for some work with them. Besides, there is also to be considered the particular ability and aptitude of every worker, writer, artist, or physician that must exercise his labors. That is a purely individual, personal factor. How are you going to estimate its value? That is why value cannot be determined. The same thing may be worth a lot to one person, while it is worth nothing or very little to another. It may be worth much or little even to the same person at different times. A diamond, a painting, or a book may be worth a great deal to one man and very little to another.
That's a really good example, because in our current system, the market-based system, diamonds are worth a hell of a lot. They're one of the most expensive items per their size in the world. But most of that is due to artificial scarcity. It's due to a few families in the world controlling the supply of the world's diamonds. Because diamonds are not that rare. They're not nearly as rare as their price would have you believe. So even with our market system, I shouldn't say even, it shouldn't be any great revelation that with our market system, diamonds are valued way more than they should be, even if it was a utility scale. So if we're looking at it from a utility point of view, I mean, it is used in electronics. It is used in certain manufacturing. You'll have like diamond tipped cutting devices or sanding devices. It is used symbolically as a symbol of marriage, but there's no intrinsic value to a lot of it. It's the same thing with gold. You know, you get all these conservatives who are super adamant that we get back on the gold standard, as though somehow gold just inherently has value because it's a solid thing that you can hold and touch, and there's a finite amount of it. But gold doesn't really have much utility in the world. You can make jewelry out of it. It's used in some, I think it's used in some medical procedures. Some technologies use gold, like really good connections in audio electronics will have gold tips because apparently it conducts the electricity really well. But there's not a lot of inherent value to it. You can't eat it. I mean, you can eat it, but it doesn't give you any nutrition. It just goes right through you. So it's really no different than any other sort of fiat currency. And fiat currency is just a currency that we've all decided has this value. Collectively, we decide that the dollar has this much value. So to a certain degree, unless we were trading like, cocoa beans or something that actually has utility beyond as a stand-in for value of labor, no currency that we use has any intrinsic value. So he's right. All these things, it really is in the, it's very subjective what any one thing has value to. I don't care about gold at all. I've never owned a piece of gold that I can remember. I would never buy gold jewelry. I could care less. Same thing with diamonds, other than the diamond that I gave to my wife in her ring, which had family and sentimental value because it came from my mom's ring. That is the only diamond on earth that I care about. I don't care about a single other diamond. And you can name any sort of extravagance. I would never want to own, say, a Lambo or another expensive sports car. I never want to own a mansion. All I would see is the dollars flying out the window every time I turn on the heater or the air conditioner. I would feel bad about the people that have to sleep out on the streets while I have such extravagance. A lot of the things that people use as signifiers of wealth, I could care less about. Does that mean that those things don't have any value? Well, if enough of us agreed on that, then yeah, they wouldn't have value. But nothing's changed about them. Nothing has changed about the properties of a mansion or a sports car or expensive clothes or jewelry or anything like that. They're still what they've always been. They're inanimate objects. The only thing that's changed is our perception of it. So, as he's trying to point out, value is very malleable, and it depends very much on what we all agree has value. Probably have some more comments, so I'll check that before we move on. So Ancom Psycom says, given Berkman and Kropotkin hung out and were friends, it makes sense that they tend to agree on these points. I didn't know they were friends. That's cool to know. I've heard from other accounts of Kropotkin that he was just one of those people that it's really, it's like animating to be around. Like he really, really believed in the stuff he believed in, and he kind of was infectious with his enthusiasm for it. So that's really cool. Definitely he'd be on my top 10 list of historical figures to have a dinner with. And Ancom Psycom also says Graeber went over the whole reasoning behind the use of gold as a concrete form of money, which is that it's precisely because it has no real qualities of its own, but that it can be used as money. But those are also precisely what's equally pointless, and as any of the forms of virtual money humans have used throughout history. And we're seeing the effect of that right now with crypto, and especially these NFTs, these non-fungible tokens, which literally have no value. Like you can say, oh, I own this picture, this crappy picture of a monkey, but you don't even own that. It's more like if you have, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of dating myself. People don't really look at or people don't really collect sports cards anymore. But back in the day, if you had a really rare sports card, you might have with it a certificate of authenticity, especially if it had like a signature on it. Basically, an NFT is owning the signature, is owning the certificate of authenticity for a work of art. It's saying, yes, this is the work of art, but you don't actually own the JPEG or the GIF or whatever it is. You don't actually even own the image. You own the URL that directs you to the image. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like owning the certificate of authenticity without owning the thing itself. It's like if you were to buy the certificate of authenticity for the Mona Lisa. It might be worth something if you can convince somebody else, but yeah, we're seeing that value of any sort of money or stand-in for money is widely debatable, and with things like Bitcoin can shoot to the moon and then crash the next day because it's completely volatile. One of the advantages of, say, a sovereign currency such as the dollar is that the US government can at least control the supply of it. So if there gets to be too much of it to prevent inflation from happening, to prevent a devaluing of it, they can tax a bunch of it out of existence. Because that's what happens at the federal level. When you send in your tax money, it doesn't go into an account. It just gets deleted from the national debt, and that's it. And it takes money out of it takes currency out of circulation and keeps that value higher. Which means, in theory, you can just keep printing money for the things you want to do as a sovereign government. And as long as you make sure to control that supply by taxing it out of existence at the other end, you can do whatever you want with that money. You can, I mean, that's the reason that the budget for the US military is never really called into question of how do we pay for it. Every other social program is, but never the military budget. And it's because you can just print the money, and then through other means of manipulating the interest rate from the Fed, you can get more of it back. And manipulating the interest rate is kind of a form of a tax. It's destroying money in the name of keeping that supply a finite amount and keeping the value up. Oh, Bullshit Jobs. That's one of my favorite books. That's what really got me in. I think that was the first book I read by Graeber. Love that one. So good, so good. And that too deals a lot with how so many jobs, like he estimated up to 40% of jobs in like the US and the UK, could be done away with tomorrow and it would have no effect on the economy whatsoever. These are things like being a yes man for a very powerful, important person just to kind of inflate their ego and make them look more important. Fixing broken systems, but never really to the point where they're fixed because for whatever reason you don't have the means to. Ticking boxes, just bureaucratic sort of work where like yes, we have the form 2A, yes, it's been submitted at the certain time, so on and so forth. A lot of these jobs that people have don't really do anything. They don't contribute anything. It's a great book. Definitely highly recommend that. So ultimately, what allows any currency to be worth anything today is the government's ability to enforce that value through violence. That's another good point, Ancoms.com. That's true too. But also they control the purse strings in a much more direct way, and that they can get rid of money if they need to. They can spend it into existence if they need to. They kind of control the entire economy through that, or at least a big portion of it, or on a macro level anyway. We'll say it that way. It's precisely because the U.S. spends so much money on its military that its money stays the lingua franca of the financial world. But there's no inherent reason that we have to spend that money on military rather than social programs. We can get that money into society in much more useful ways. We can, for one thing, we can cancel student debt. We can fund universal health care, which would destroy a bunch of jobs in the process. There's no getting around that part. That's the end of the health insurance industry as we know it, because if there's a universal system and they pay for everything, there's no more need for these middlemen deciding, who gets their coverage and who doesn't, or who gets their procedure covered and who doesn't, things like that. Social program for the poor is the military. That is a sad fact too. But instead of saying, "Hey, we'll give you all this money for college, we'll give you preferred loans for a house, we'll give you all these other benefits and pay beyond what's locally available, as long as you agree to consign sign your body over to the military to kill or be killed wherever we tell you to." Instead of doing that, we could just send people to college for free. We could help them relocate if they no longer want to be in their hometown. We could just give money to hometowns or these small towns to help them reorient and diversify their economy, so they're not dependent on one thing, like a factory town where whatever they're doing no longer is needed, and the factory closes and everyone's basically just out of work. Universal healthcare. I agree. But we're almost 2 hours in, and we've hardly covered a third of this chapter. So I think we do need to keep moving.
A loaf of bread will be worth a great deal to you if you are hungry, and much less when you are not. Therefore, the real value of a thing cannot be ascertained. It is an unknown quantity. But the price is easily found out. If there are 5 loaves of bread to be had, and 10 persons want to get each loaf, the price of bread will rise. If there are 10 loaves and only 5 buyers, then it will fall. Price depends on supply and demand. The exchange of commodities by means of prices leads to profit-making, to taking advantage and exploitation. In short, to some form of capitalism.
Important distinction too. Profit is what's left over after you've paid your workers and after you've paid all your expenses. Everything that's left over that, as an owner, you can legally do whatever you feel like. I mean, you may have some fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, but beyond all that sort of thing and the expenses, which labor is included as an expense, profit is what's left over. So without having a separate owner class, there is no such thing as profit. It's just revenue versus expenses. And once what's left over after your expenses have been paid, when all the workers have control over the operation, is not exactly profit, because you're not taking it from anyone else. It's from your own labor. It's just I don't know. I don't actually know what the proper term would be for it. I guess it's just the balance of what's left over, and then you decide collectively how that's distributed. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on.
If you do away with profits, you cannot have any price system, nor any system of wages or payment. That means exchange must be according to value. But as
I don't think that's actually true. Because in a worker-owned cooperative, you're not exploiting anybody. I mean, it's all just, like I said, it's what's left over after you've paid your expenses that you then distribute amongst all the worker owners. So you still could be running a for-profit enterprise. So yeah, I don't quite see where he's coming from in that. I think you can have prices and a market even if you don't have exploitation.
value is uncertain and not ascertainable, exchange must be consequently free, without equal value, since such does not exist. In other words, labor and its products must be exchanged without price, without profit, freely, according to necessity. This logically leads to ownership in common and joint use, which is sensible, just, and an equitable system, and is known as communism. But is it just that all should share alike, you demand? Should the man of brains and the dullard, the efficient and the inefficient, all the same? Should there be no distinction, no special recognition for those of ability? Let me in turn ask you, my friend, shall we punish the man whom nature has not endowed as generously as his stronger or more talented neighbor?
That's an important concept. So the way that liberals would like to conceive of the system is that we actually live in an why am I not thinking of the term? We live in a system that rewards people that are the best at what they do. Boy, why can I not think of the term? This is so stupid. Not egalitarian, in a what is the name of the word? Meritocracy. Thank you so much. I don't know why that word left my brain, but yeah. So imagine if okay, so for one thing, we don't live in a meritocracy. Anyone that's ever had a job where the owner's kid got a special bit of treatment, or saw that just because someone went to a certain school, they got special position, or just because they happen to know somebody, they got a job. Anyone can see that we don't live in a meritocracy. There's plenty of things that go beyond just pure merit that go into who gets where they are. I'm sure all of us have had bosses that didn't deserve to be bosses, that made extra work for everyone in the job because they were so incompetent that everyone had to kind of, work around them and pick up their slack and all these sorts of things. We don't live in a meritocracy. So, but the thing is that people, I heard it described once as kind of the Brandeis liberals, those that go to elite universities, people like Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, nepotism. Yeah, nepotism runs rampant in capitalism. But people like Elizabeth Warren, they want us to live in a meritocracy. And that kind of is the American liberal ideal, is, you're the best person at this thing, so you get compensated the most. You're a really good surgeon. Well, you deserve to have unlimited money. You're and it could be even for things like teachers. If you're a really good teacher, that's a very valuable thing. We as a society should give more to you than a really bad teacher. It kind of sounds good on paper until you realize that that's still, for one thing, as he said, discriminating based on innate characteristics. So just because someone happens to be a super athlete, just because they have the right metabolism, they have the right muscle structure, they have the right spatial reasoning to get that ball in the hoop better than anyone else, that's still discriminating and determining people's outcome in life based on stuff that is kind of immutable. The people that end up making it into major league sports have some sort of inborn talent. It's not as though you can just be like a Rudy story, and if you just really have the most heart and you really try hard, then no matter what happens, you too can end up being in the NBA, because that, for 99% of people, that's just never going to be the case. I could practice basketball from here to eternity. I would never be in the NBA. Never, ever, ever. I'm not even I'm 6'4". I'm not really even tall enough to be in the NBA. And my body structure is much larger. I have a much larger frame than most NBA players. And I just don't have the innate talent. So why should it be then that these people that have these genetic gifts should end up with much better lives just because of a roll of the genetic dice? Because then you look at the other end of it, and if we just lived in a pure meritocracy where everyone was just sorted based on their talent, then people that aren't really good at a lot of stuff, or people that have disabilities, what happens to them? If you really cannot work any conventional sort of job for whatever reason, are you just tossed out? Do you end up homeless? Are you at the mercy of charities where they'll give you the means of sustenance, even though you don't really deserve it? Are you just consigned to begging for your life for your entire life? Now, most liberals, if they're progressive enough, would then say, "Oh, no, that's where social programs come in, and we take care of those who can't take care of themselves." Well, that's only part of an answer, because there's still a lot of people in that system that just are never going to have the right set of talents to have a high income at that point. And should they be left behind? Should they not get to have all of life's experiences? Should they be constantly worrying about making it just because they happen to not win the genetic lottery? I would say no. I would say that does not benefit society overall. That does not maximize the democracy, choice, and freedom of everybody if some people are allowed to slip through the cracks. So that's why I say, at the very least, we need to provide a platform of the basics of life to everybody, regardless of their supposed contribution to society or the world. Everybody. Just start from at least that basic platform, so that at least at that point, you have a choice of how to spend your life. You have the ability to participate in the democratic system, no matter what. Right now, a lot of people are scrambling so much just to survive, just to make ends meet, that they don't have time to get involved in politics at all. So even if there was an issue that they cared about, they wouldn't have time to do anything about it. They wouldn't have time to do the proper research to be able to speak on it. They certainly wouldn't have time to run for office. And if we're supposed to have a democracy that's open to anyone, that has to be more than just free of legal barriers to entry, that technically you can be president too, because there's nothing legally stopping you. You also have to have the ability to do so. It's the freedom to do something. But I think I'm getting a little bit off of the point that Berkman's trying to make there. So let's get back to how he's explaining that meritocracy still leaves a lot of people behind.
Shall we add injustice to the handicap nature has put upon him? All we can reasonably expect from any man is that he do his best. Can any man do more? And if John's best is not as good as his brother's Jim's, it is his misfortune, but in no case a fault to be punished. There is nothing more dangerous than discrimination. The moment you begin discriminating against the less capable, you establish conditions that breed dissatisfaction and resentment. You invite envy, discord, and strife.
And you also are starting from a position that assumes that everyone has equal opportunity, which in an unequal society, let's say that you have a lot of talent, but your parents didn't. And so you live in a bad house, you don't have as good nutrition, you probably are in a worse school district because that's the school district that your parents deserve to be in, right? Because they just happen to not have the talents that are desired by the world. Then what happens to their children? Their children could be then held back by that, because there's nothing genetic that says that just because you're good at this, that your children are going to be good at this, or because you have a skill that everyone determines is useful, that you'll be able to develop it and really have an opportunity to compete with other people, to do that sorting of meritocracy. So as soon as you start creating these different classes of people based even on merit, it still starts to bake things in generationally or intergenerationally. And then you have prejudices. Well, all these people, they tend to do worse at this sort of thing, so we're not really going to believe that someone coming from that group is likely to have the right talents that we're looking for. So there's no point in even trying to look. There's no point in going into the inner city to find super smart kids, because obviously their parents weren't that smart. Otherwise, they wouldn't have ended up there. We live in a meritocracy, right? So there's just less likelihood. And we happen to notice that this group of people, and it can be whatever designation you like, tend to do worse at this sort of thing. Now, again, it could have absolutely nothing to do with any sort of merit, but it could just be something like this group of people have been forced to live in a place where there are lead pipes still. And lead, there was just another study that came out that said that lead has an even greater effect on IQ, or lead exposure, I should say, has an even greater effect on IQ than they previously thought. So you could have an entire group of people whose IQ has been lowered just by they're not, again, assuming we have even a meritocratic society, just by this group of people having less useful talents, they could be put in a position that holds back their children and themselves even more because of, the way it usually shakes out is environmental racism. The poorest people tend to be people that are not white, and they get shoved into places that are polluted and that are given less resources. So they have many more hurdles to overcome to even compete on a level playing field. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, no more comments. Let's keep on moving then.
You would think it brutal to withhold from the less capable the air or water they need. Should not the same principle apply to the other wants of man? After all, the matter of food and clothing and shelter is the smallest item in the world's economy. The surest way to get one to do his best is by not discriminating against him, but by treating him on an equal footing with others. That is the most effective encouragement and stimulus. It is just and human. But what will you do with the lazy man, the man who does not want to work? Inquires your friend. That is an interesting question.
I would say you give them their life. You don't hold their life over their head, because that's cruel, and we have more than enough resources for everybody. So doing so is just arbitrary cruelty because they don't meet your moral standard. We should never have people begging for their lives. We should never have anyone in a precarious position in their life, even if it's their own doing, even if they smoked a pack a day their entire life, or maybe not their entire life, but their entire adult life, and now they have really poor health. We shouldn't say, well, you don't deserve any health care, go die on the street. That's cruel, especially when we can save them. We can treat them. We have the capacity. Not doing so for moral reasons is still saying that some people are less worthy than others, less deserving of life than others. And I think we can do better than that. So in any given society, there will be lazy people. There'll be people that mooch off others and steal even when they don't have to, and are just nasty people in general. That doesn't mean they don't deserve a life. I think that's a pretty baseline humanitarian thing that we can say. Everybody deserves life. So therefore, everyone deserves to have the basics of having a life, no matter what they do. There should be no decision you make in your life that ends you up on the street, unless you really, really, really just love not having a home. In that case, I guess there's nothing anyone can do about it. You're free to make your own decisions. But you should at least always have the ability to then have a home if you change your mind.
And you will probably be very much surprised when I say there is really no such thing as laziness. What we call a lazy man is generally a square man in a round hole. That is, the right man in the wrong place. And you will always find that when a fellow is in the wrong place, he will be inefficient or shiftless. For so-called laziness and a good deal of inefficiency are merely unfitness, misplacement. If you are compelled to do the thing that you are unfitted for by your inclinations or temperament, you will be inefficient at it. If you are forced to do work that you are not interested in, you will be lazy at it. Everyone who has managed affairs in which large numbers of men...
I like these points that he's bringing up, because it is hard to get a baseline on how people would be if they were not in a system that was constantly crushing them down. If the thing that's holding you back and making you appear lazy is depression, and the depression is caused by never having choice in your life, never seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, thinking that things will always be bad for you, and just embracing that capitalist realism that this is going to be the system we always have, then it's hard to really even tell what you would be in another system. But you can make a good guess that if you were doing a job that you instead cared about, if you felt like you were making a difference in your community, if you were given all the things that you need to survive so that you could have the choice about what to do with your life, there's a good chance you would be feeling empowered and happy to work, even if right now, because of the current circumstances of the system, you're not feeling like contributing. So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Were employed can substantiate this. Life in prison is a particularly convincing proof of the truth of it. And, after all, present-day existence for most people is but that of a larger jail. Every prison warden will tell you that inmates put to tasks which they have no ability or interest are always lazy and subject to continuous punishment. But as soon as these refractory convicts are assigned to work that appeals to their leanings, they become model men, as the jailers term them.
It's amazing.
Russia has also significantly demonstrated the verity of it. It has shown how little we know of human potentialities and of the effect of the environment upon them, how we mistake wrong conditions for bad conduct. Russian refugees, leading a miserable and inefficient life in foreign lands, on returning home, and finding in the revolution a proper field for their activities, have accomplished most wonderful work in their right sphere, and have developed into brilliant organizers, builders of railroads, and creators of industry. Among the Russian names best known abroad today are those of men considered shiftless and inefficient under conditions where their ability and energies could not find proper application. That is human nature. Efficiency in a certain direction means inclination and capability for it. Industry and application signify interest. That is why there is so much inefficiency and laziness in the world today. For who indeed nowadays is in his right place? Who works at what he really likes and is interested in? Under present conditions, there is little choice given the average man to devote himself to the tasks that appeal to his leanings and preferences. The accident of your birth and social station generally predetermines your trade or profession. The son of the financier does not as a rule become a woodchopper, though he may be more fit to handle logs than bank accounts. The middle classes send their children to colleges, which turn them into doctors, lawyers, or engineers. But if your parents were workers who could not afford to let you study, the chances are that you will take any job that is offered to you, or enter some trade that happens to afford you an apprenticeship. Your particular situation will decide your work or profession, not your natural preference, inclinations, or abilities. Is it any wonder then that most people, the overwhelming majority in fact, are misplaced? Ask the first 100 men you meet whether they would have selected the work they are doing, or whether they would continue in it if they were free to choose, and 99 of them will admit that they would prefer some other occupation. Necessity and material advantages, or hope of them, keep most people in the wrong place. It stands to reason that a person can give the best of himself only when his interest is in his work, when he feels a natural attraction to it, when he likes it. Then he will be industrious and efficient. The things the craftsmen produced in the days before modern capitalism were objects of joy and beauty, because the artisan loved his work. Can you expect the modern drudge in the ugly, huge factory to make beautiful things? He is part of a machine, a cog in the soulless industry, his labor mechanical, forced. Add to this a feeling that he is not working for himself, but for the benefit of someone else, and that he hates his job, or at best has no interest in it except that it secures his weekly wage. The result is shirking, inefficiency, and laziness. The need of activity is one of the most fundamental urges of man. Watch the child and see how strong his instinct for action, for movement, for doing something, strong and continuous. It is the same with the healthy man. His energy and vitality demand expression. Permit him to do the work of his choice, the thing that he loves, and his application will know neither weariness nor shirking. You can observe this in the factory worker when he is lucky enough to own a garden or a patch of ground to raise some flowers or vegetables on. Tired from his toil, he enjoys the hardest labor for his own benefit, done from free choice. Under anarchism, each will have the opportunity of following whatever occupation will appeal to his natural inclinations and aptitude. Work will become a pleasure instead of deadening drudgery that it is today. Laziness will be unknown, and the things created by interest and love will be objects of beauty and joy. But can labor ever become a pleasure, you demand? Labor is toil today, unpleasant, exhausting, and wearisome. But usually it is not the work itself that is so hard. It is the conditions under which you are compelled to labor that make it so, particularly the long hours, unsanitary workshops, bad treatment, insufficient pay, and so on. Yet the most unpleasant work could be made lighter by improving the environment. Take gutter cleaning, for instance. It is dirty work and poorly paid for. But suppose, for example, you should get $20 a day instead of $2 for such work. You will immediately find your job much lighter and pleasanter. The number of applicants for work would be increase at once, which means that men are not lazy, not afraid of hard and unpleasant labor if it is properly rewarded. But such work is considered menial and is looked down upon. Why is it considered menial? Is it not the most useful and absolutely necessary job? Would not epidemics sweep our city but for the street and gutter cleaners? Surely the men who keep our town clean and sanitary are real benefactors, more vital to our health and welfare than the family physician. From the viewpoint of social usefulness, the street cleaner is the professional colleague of the doctor.
So then imagine if street cleaners were paid on the scale with the service they're providing for the city. And there's plenty of analogs we could use to update this example, because modern streets are more self-cleaning than they were in Berkman's day. This is almost 100 years ago, so I would guess that say dirt roads would be much more prevalent even in cities. Things that get ruts and are very easily impassable and very easily full of filth and disease. I think sanitation has improved just in general. We have storm sewers now. So, but update that to say garbage collector. Garbage collector is a pretty dirty job, no matter how you slice it. Even though that today a lot of it's done by machine, the big claw thing that comes out and grabs the can and throws it up in there. There's still going to be times when the garbage collector has to come in contact with the most disgusting things that people produce. But imagine if it was compensated on that scale, on the scale of how useful it was to society. So even divorcing it somewhat from the amount of labor required to how useful it is, how much of a benefit doing that work is, and how much society would be worse off if it was not done, you would find some of the happiest garbage collectors ever. And I think that's a much more just and equitable way to do things. To instead of just saying, what will the market bear? What does the market want? To instead say, what is good for society? And then there's going to be a lot of cases where it's unclear. If you're a toy manufacturer, to a certain extent, you could say there is a benefit to society. You can talk about educational toys. You can talk about just the value of having entertainment in children's lives and imagination, all these sorts of things. But people are going to look at it from different points of view. But when it's things that are that basic, like garbage collection, it's pretty easy to see the value for it. So at least for those sorts of jobs, it seems as though compensating them on the scale of how much they help the community is more justified and would get better results and would really empower the people that do it. So that's how you can incentivize dirty jobs that still need to get done. Now, you never want to get to the point where you're producing schisms where, like, the garbage collector makes, all the garbage collectors are millionaires now and everyone else gets average wages. But somewhere within that range of piss poor compensation, which is what I would imagine most garbage collectors are at now. I don't actually know. I haven't looked up a garbage collecting job recently. To the king of the city levels of compensation. I think we can find something that's more commensurate with the value that they are bringing to us as a whole. You can do that for a lot of jobs, food producers. Again, there's going to be some foods where we, decide, do you really need to have this many desserts? What's really the value of this stuff that has not as much nutritional value? And there's some wiggle room in determining all this stuff. But overall, people that produce food are providing a tremendous service, one that society would fall apart. In fact, they say that the average city has something like I think it's a week and a half. Let me look that up. That's an interesting statistic. I was not surprised, but then again, it's one of those things where you're not surprised, but it still impacts you quite a bit. Let's see. So the average American household, it looks like, this is according to sciforums.com, pop science, but I'm sure it's pretty close to the truth. The average American household has only 3 days worth of perishable and non-perishable foods. So you figure that an average grocery store has some stock in the back. You could maybe extend that out to a week, maybe a week and a half. But after that point, people are going to start going hungry. And then that stopwatch starts to the point where people are literally starving. So without food production, everything falls apart. So we can definitely, on at least the macro level, say that producing food should be compensated very well. Same thing with education. Without education, society starts to break down. There's not enough skilled people to do all these skilled jobs. I hate using that term skilled because there's no such thing as unskilled labor. Every job takes skill to do. It's mostly just a way of framing things that justifies giving people terrible wages. I think I missed a couple of comments back there. Let's back up just a little bit. Ooh. The Idiot novel by Fyodor. I don't know if I'm saying that. Dostoevsky. I think that's the better way of pronouncing it. Don't know that one. Interesting, John. Let's look it up. The Idiot novel. Idiot, a novel by Dostoevsky. We'll link to that. Just a basic Wikipedia overview. Pop that in the chat there for everybody. So, The Idiot is a novel by, I wish there was a pronunciation for his name, because something tells me Fyodor is not the way to say it, but Dostoevsky was the first published serially in the journal The Russian Messenger. It's an ironic reference to the central character of the novel, Prince so-and-so. Not going to attempt that one either. The young man whose goodness, open-hearted simplicity, and guilelessness led many of the more worldly characters he encounters to mistakenly assume that he lacks intelligence and insight. In the character of Prince Mishkin, Dostoevsky set himself the task of depicting the positively good and beautiful man. The novel examines the consequences of placing such a singular individual in the center of the conflicts, desires, passions, and egoism of worldly society, both for the man himself, and for those whom he becomes involved. All right, interesting. Cool. I will check that out another time. Dostoevsky, not Dostoevsky. Thank you. Fyodor. That feels strange in my mouth there. Oh, hello, Kay. How do you say? Welcome back. Good to see you. So Ancom Sitcom says meritocracy is just market logic applied to human ability. That's it. It's for people that believe that the free market is the best way to determine what ideas should be put forward and what ideas should fail. People that have that same faith, yeah, that they're just applying that to human society. So the best people get advanced and the worst people get put back where they belong. So yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. So again, if you believe that somehow the market is all knowing and that just by the collective human desire of this thing or that thing, which is not at all manipulated by advertisement and repetition and other subliminal nudges and outright misinformation, if you believe that somehow the market is the best way of determining what ideas are best and what ideas are best left on paper, then sure, I guess you could believe that meritocracy is the best way to organize human society. Both seem patently naive to me. There's so much manipulation that goes on with the market. The best idea does not always win. And there's countless examples of this. The Zune. Does anyone remember the Zune? I think it was Windows. Was it Windows who? I keep hitting the microphone. My apologies. The Zune. The Zune. Well, yeah, it was a Windows. It's basically, if you remember what an iPod is, or yeah, an iPod is. It was basically just a music storage device. You could put all sorts of digital media on it, and you could play it back. This was before people did streaming and kept music on their phone and all that sort of thing. So the Zune, the way that it worked, it was better in every way than Apple's iPod. It lasted longer. I think it held more. It had more storage for the price. I think it cost less. By pretty much every metric, it was a better product than Apple's iPod. But Apple had a better marketing campaign. They made their product look cool. They got the right celebrities to endorse it. They had slick marketing campaigns. And lo and behold, the iPod won out until cell phones took over all of that feature. And places like Spotify and Pandora came in and just made streaming the default way of enjoying music. But before that point, people talk about the user interface as well. Good point, Ancom. So in that case, the market did not determine what the best product was. Slick marketing did, and more marketing did. Like, you had to really be into these sorts of devices to really even be aware of the Zune. I cannot think of a single Zune commercial, but I do remember the early iPod commercials. We're not going to go on that much of a tangent, but just look up iPod commercials. They're very iconic. They put a lot of art and flashiness into them, and they made it look cool and slick. And because of those things, their product won out. But that's not how the market's supposed to be. Well, I mean, that's just one example. But you can look up countless examples of this happening. There was the VHS versus Betamax, and no one thinks that VHS was a better medium for videotapes. Everyone agrees that Betamax was better, but they were not marketed right, and they lost out. You can just keep pulling up these examples throughout history. Oftentimes the one who wins is the one that just throws the most money at it, whether it's in terms of marketing, whether it's in terms of buying up competition and then destroying that competition. Like, especially today with like intellectual property and stuff, a lot of patents are bought just to never have anyone be able to use them to compete against you. A lot of them are just used to sue other companies who might somewhat infringe on your product. But if it was about making the best ideas come forward, then there would be protections for those other companies to put forward good ideas that you're not using, even if you technically have a patent on it. iPod is now going to rent. I have no idea what that means. The market does not determine what the best ideas are by any stretch. Don't be fooled into that way of thinking. Capitalists pump tons of money into that idea and keeping it going, but it is not. The idea that somehow cars are just the favored form of transportation for the U.S. because America has a love affair with the car. That phrase right there is marketing. Let's see who came up with that phrase. Let's look that part up quick, and then we'll get back on track and we'll get back into more of the book. Okay. So it came along in a TV show called Merrily We Roll Along as part of the DuPont series of the week in 1961. America's love affair with the automobile. That did not rise in any way organically in American culture. It was pushed upon us to sell more cars. Because, I mean, I wonder just how many of you who are listening right now, if you had inexpensive or free, reliable, so coming any time of the day or night, going to all the places, a sufficient network of all the places that you tend to go to, system of mass transit, would you give up your car? And let's even say that there's still rental cars, there's still Uber, there's still cars you can get in times of emergency. If you had reliable mass transit that went all the places you want for an inexpensive or free, would you prefer to use that? So you wouldn't be stuck in traffic, wouldn't have to worry about drunk drivers, wouldn't have to worry about road construction, wouldn't have to worry about car repairs. Car repairs suck. I know I would make that choice every time. I do take the bus sometimes home from work because my wife and I we have just one car. That's been an intentional choice. You would walk, okay, but still, that's not the car. I wager that given real choice, most Americans would give up their car, if not entirely, then for most things. They would maybe rent a car for a vacation, or to move, or these sorts of things that come up once in a while. But I think most Americans would choose mass transit if they had a positive opinion of it and if it was reliable and extensive enough to take them 99% of the places they wanted to go in their daily life. Yeah, diamond is forever. That's another good one. That's just marketing. Again, we talked about this earlier. Diamonds are only expensive because we've been convinced that they're precious and rare, but they're artificially rare because they're literally controlled. The amount of diamonds in the market is controlled by, I think it's just the De Beers family. Hassan Dahir, greetings. I'm eager to find more about communism. Well, we're talking about communist anarchism. So on the same continuum, it's kind of a balance between, full individualist anarchism and state socialism, which is what's most often thought of as communism. So this is definitely on the anarchist side for sure. This is about a society where people have free choice and rights are balanced and that sort of thing. That's another good point too, John. We intentionally closed down public transportation in large part because it was privately owned, and then it was bought up by a few companies. I've covered this documentary called "Taken for a Ride," so I'm gonna link it to the playlist here. They're just 2 videos. Excuse me, but I'll link it to that playlist in 1 second. But yeah, we had public transportation taken away from us because they wanted to sell us cars. And they intentionally swapped out, in many places, rail service. So they took away the rail service and they put in buses because they knew people would hate the buses. They were loud and polluting, streetcars and trolleys and subways and stuff are electric. They're not polluting. But they knew that people would hate the diesel buses. And, they kept them up poorly and they made them not come on time. There's all sorts of manipulation. Where is that playlist? So it's under my New Urbanist playlist. So Taken for a Ride, part 1 and 2. Check it out. Let me just share it here. Oh, that's a long URL. Ugh. I always make playlist URLs incredibly long. I find that annoying. But here, you can look in my New Urbanism playlist, look up the 2 videos on Taken for a Ride, and you'll see the history of the systematic dismantling of our once glorious, once the world's envy mass transit systems across the country. As a kid, you could go everywhere without a car. Yeah, that's very difficult to do these days. Even where there is decent mass transit, oftentimes it doesn't run 24 hours, or it's limited in what lines run 24 hours. Oftentimes it doesn't work. It doesn't run on the weekend, or it doesn't run as much. So, yeah. I know that for me, it is literally a 15 to 20 minute drive to get from my work home, but an hour and a half bus ride. And it's fairly direct too. I do have to do a transfer, and that generally eats up a half hour right there. But still, it's an hour of transit for what is a 20-minute car ride. And it costs me more than I would spend in gas. And yeah, it's not at all a comparable experience. I'm on their schedule too. So oftentimes if I just miss a bus, if it's the middle of the day before the rush hour kicks in again, I have to wait an hour before I can get the next bus. And then sometimes it'll say it's coming late, and then it'll end up coming early. It's just it's not looked after very well. We'll put it that way. And it's because the people that have to rely on the bus tend to be the poorest of people, and they have the least political power. So they always get shuffled. Transit always gets shuffled to the back burner. Anyway, let's continue on in the book. I'm going to try and make it about to the halfway point. So we're got about 4 minutes left. We'll get as far as we can, but we're only going to get halfway through this chapter. I was kind of figuring that, because we're getting into the meatier parts of the book. So I do to say, and you all have been asking and commenting really good stuff. So yeah, it's great. No rush really. Let's continue. If it's hard to remember what place we left off, because that was a bit of a tangent, then I'll back it up a little bit and we'll get back into this idea.
The latter treats us when we are ill, but the former helps keep us well.
Okay.
Yet the physician is looked up to with respect.
So he's comparing different jobs. He's like, well, the physician, he might do a life-saving procedure that only takes an hour of his time. Is that then worth less than the laborer who makes something else that you need for your life, but doesn't save your life? If you only value things in terms of the labor that goes into them, quickly discrepancies. That's kind of what he's arguing. He's arguing that we need to go beyond what Marx wanted in terms of figuring out how to compensate people. But it should be noted too that even if we do the labor theory of value, and you look at all labor as equally integral to the system as a whole, and therefore you should compensate it the same way for everybody, that's still a better system than we have today, with labor is compensated by what the boss can get away with and feel that they, have a reasonable chance of retaining you as an employee. So still moving into the going by the labor theory of value, that's still a huge step up from what we have now. So let's not lose sight of that. But he's just arguing that we need to go beyond that because it's just too complicated to really get down to how we value one thing versus another. There's just too much apples to oranges comparisons in life, and too much complication when, a single product is handled by many different laborers. Like, you take a can of vegetables. Well, are we figuring in the labor that went into growing the vegetables and transporting them and then canning them, and then the labor of the people that make the cans, the labor of people that mine the metal for the cans, the labor of people that go to school to learn how to run a factory, how to make machines? What he's saying is it gets too complicated too quickly to really suss out adequate compensation just based on labor.
While the street cleaner is slighted. Why? Is it because the street cleaner's work is dirty? But the surgeon often has much dirtier jobs to perform. Then why is the street cleaner scorned? Because he earns little. In our perverse civilization, things are valued according to money standards. Persons doing the most useful work are lowest in the social scale when their employment is ill paid. Should something happen, however, that would cause the street cleaner to get $100 a day while the physician earns so, the dirty street cleaner would immediately rise in estimation and social station. And the filthy laborer, he would become a much sought-after man of good income. You see that it is pay, remuneration, the wage scale, not worth or merit, that today our system of profit determines the value of work as well as the worth of a man. A sensible society under anarchist conditions would have entirely different standards of judging such matters. People will then be appreciated according to their willingness to be socially useful. Can you perceive what great changes such a new attitude would produce? Everyone yearns for the respect and admiration of his fellow men. It is a tonic we cannot live without. Even in prison, I have seen how the clever pickpocket or safe blower longs for the appreciation of his friends, how hard he tries to earn their good estimate of him.
And you bring up a decent point, John. You say that I believe some people need a higher pay to facilitate the participation needs, like surgeons should get drivers, and we all need recreation and pleasure and time to converse. Yes, definitely. There's definitely a lot that can be decided on collectively as a community about what particular professions are worth, and how much a particular profession contributes, and if we're going to compensate them differently on that. But even if we're looking at a system that's not even as far along as anarchism, just a basic market socialism, where every endeavor the people vote on democratically, the workers own the means of production directly. It's not controlled by the government. It's not controlled by the local municipality or the community collectively. It's just controlled. The endeavor is controlled by the workers themselves. So take a hospital again. It's pretty likely that in a hospital, even if pay is determined by everybody collectively by votes, it's pretty likely that they're going to decide to compensate the surgeons better than, say, a food service person who works in the cafeteria, or a janitor, or some person who answers phones. There's a pretty good chance that they're going to want to reward people that they see as doing really vital stuff. That's a huge benefit to society as a whole. But at least they'll get that chance. At least they get the chance to have a say in how things should be divvied up. And they might come to the conclusion that some jobs should be compensated more than others. Or like, the surgeon will be required to work less hours than a less physically and mentally demanding job. There's all sorts of things that could be sussed out that way amongst the people that are all involved in that endeavor. But yeah, it's not as though everyone is necessarily going to be just compensated the basic level, and no matter what you do in life, you are just an interchangeable part in the machine of society. There's definitely room for different things being rewarded differently, based on whatever people come up with as a way to decide that and divvy things up. So you say Russia went into, I assume by Russia you mean the USSR, went into a form of human domestication and sucked the life out of people. I think that's not an unfair way of looking at things. They definitely had a lot of pressures on them. They had just come through World War I, and they were pretty depleted, and so they use that as an excuse to have certain people retain power, and yes, they did to a certain degree, alienate people from their labor. They made it more like a factory owner looks at things. It's just inputs and outputs. This group of society has to do this much output. This part of society has to do their part here. And yeah, it is kind of dehumanizing. Yeah, public research and development centers, those could still take place, even if it's controlled by the people that are working for, again, whatever endeavor it is. So you wonder what the government thinks about these issues. I don't know what they think about what issues. I guess I need some more clarification. What exactly you're getting at? So we are locked out of development. Okay. Well, I mean, having more control over your workplace does enfranchise you more. It does give you a say in maybe not directly in things that are outside of your expertise. I like to give the example of, if you were going to have a worker-owned nuclear power plant, it's probably not a good idea to have just every worker there decide on safety standards, how much of capacity they're going to run the reactors at, how to safely handle everything, that sort of stuff. That definitely is something you want to defer to expertise for. But there might be some areas where everyone could have a say that are beyond just the basic compensation and benefits and stuff like that. So you mean the minimum wage for the hard workers of any work? Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, the only reason that we need the minimum wage in the United States is because we have very low labor participation, or very, very low union participation from labor, I should say. In countries like Finland, Norway, especially Sweden, there's much higher labor participation. There's much bigger presence of organized labor. And because of their collective power to bargain for better wages, there's just no need to have minimum wage. Yeah, I agree. I think people do deserve, at the very least, the basics to have a life. Yeah, no one should be tossed out on the streets or, be forced to beg for their life because of anything that they do. Everyone should have the basics so that they can make choices in their life and have the most freedom. Always, of course, balancing it with the freedom of others to do the same. Good points. Let's continue on.
The opinions of our circle rule our behavior. The social atmosphere, to a profound degree, determines our values and attitude. Your personal experience will tell you how true this is. And therefore, you will not be surprised when I say that in an anarchist society, it will be the most useful and difficult toil that men seek, rather than the lighter job. If you consider this, you will have no more fear of laziness or shirking. But the hardest and most onerous task could be made easier and cleaner than is the case today. The capitalist employer does not care to spend money if he can help it to make the toil of his employees pleasanter and brighter, but he will introduce improvements only when he hopes to gain larger profits thereby. But he will not go the extra expense out of purely humanitarian reasons.
Absolutely not.
Though here I must
always remember, your boss is not your friend, and management works for your boss first and foremost, not for you. So no matter how many pizza parties they throw for you, no matter how many times they remind you we're all just family, don't fall for it. This is all in service of manipulating you into accepting harder work, longer hours, and less pay. And doing things that are outside the scope of your job description as well. That happens at my job from time to time. There's no compensation offered for filling up the delivery trucks with gas. It is all just taken out of my own time, and which basically means that I'm making less per hour because I'm having to spend 20 minutes at a gas station to fill it up, because those tanks are quite large, because those delivery trucks get horrible gas mileage, but they want them to have at least a range of a couple hundred miles. So in today's prices, it's been usually around $80 to $90 to fill up one of the trucks, and that takes a lot of time. That's time that I'm not compensated for. Of course, if I don't do it and I run out of gas, it's my fault. I'm not going to have any sympathy for my employer, but technically, it was not in my job description. I don't get compensated for it, but I gotta kind of put up with it because, again, what's the alternative? But they love to shove you into those sorts of positions where if you don't do the extra work, it's just going to mean extra headache and work for yourself later down the road. So keep that in mind. They are not your friends, and they don't do things out of the goodness of their heart. If they had it their way, you would get minimum wage, no matter what your job is. If a CEO of a large, 10,000 person company could get away with paying everyone, minimum wage, or even less, if there was no minimum wage and then there was no union representation, they would do it in a heartbeat because it would mean more profits for them. And that's what they're in it for the money.
must remind you that the more intelligent employers are beginning to see it, and it pays to improve their factories, make them more.
We'll get some long comments. Let's get through those. John says their wage should be based on a single basket of goods needed to provide for three, so that not everyone has to do wage labor, and others can do volunteer and family duties. Yeah, absolutely. That seems pretty reasonable to me. Basing a minimum wage on the minimum to support a family, because the average household is what, 2 adults and a couple of kids. So yeah, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to support all of that, because there's always other things, always unpaid labor that needs to take place in a house. And we could talk about paying, compensating people that do things like raise children. It's kind of a strange system we have when you think about it. I'm gonna go off on a little tangent, but I promise we'll get back to it. It's a strange system that we have where if you decide to stay home and raise your own children, you don't get compensated for it. It is that no one has an expectation that society is going to shell out for it, like, at all. But if you raise someone else's kids, if you run a daycare, then of course you're compensated for it. So you're paid to raise other people's kids, but you're never paid to raise your own kids. Kind of a weird system we live in, isn't it? And it's because traditional women's work is kind of taken for granted. That's really all there is to it. That's why care work of any kind is always some of the worst compensated, especially in relation to the good it does for society and the difficulty of work. I know that firsthand. I used to do transportation for people with disabilities, and it was vital work. These people needed to get to their day centers, to their jobs, and back to home every day. And it was some of the most vulnerable people out there. It was a good for society, but it was very poorly compensated. I think minimum wage was still about $7.25, $7.50 at the time, because it hasn't changed in the decades since I've done that work. But I was making like, $10.50, $11 an hour. Not much better than minimum wage to do very vital, necessary work that anyone I'd tell my job to is like, oh, wow, that's so great. You do that stuff. I'm like, yeah. Excuse me. I'm like, yeah, it'd be nice if it was compensated a little bit better. That's eventually why I had to leave, because it just wasn't enough. Otherwise, I might still be doing that job. That was a great job, and I really had a good connection with those people that I served every day, but it does not pay. So, getting into some longer comments here. Ancom SciCom says, my spouse spent months doing way more than their job description. When they finally asked to be paid for the extra work, they were told to stop doing work outside their job. The old bait and switch. Yep. It's implied that you should do this work, or it's heavily suggested that you do this work, but after you do it, well, we didn't have any contract about that. You don't get compensated for that stuff. Just stop doing that stuff. Oh, that's horrifically cruel. And it's but it's indicative of the way that most jobs tend to work. So putting in those extra hours, okay. Told to stop doing work outside of their job description, putting in those extra duties on the people to whom they should have belonged the whole time, but who chose not to do them. That's horrible too. Even after my spouse stopped doing those extra duties, they still are getting undone, despite the ownership having explicitly told others to do those jobs. And that's an emotional manipulation tactic they like to do a lot. They appeal to your sense of morality or justice or whatever, in the hopes that you'll go that extra bit, uncompensated, of course. So in short, going above and beyond your assigned duties, says Ancom SciCom, will never earn reward, at least not in any significant material way. And then we have Scatterbox. Most bosses are good people trying to manage any organization the best they can. Personally, they may be good people. As bosses, I'm not so confident in that. As entrepreneurs, I'm not so convinced of their good intentions on average. They're there to make money, and they're there to control whatever sort of operation it is, to have the reins of the endeavor. Sure, some CEOs are out of touch, says Scatterbox, but most people in charge do the best they can. And we also live in a system that there is inherently exploitation of worker by owner. So even if they're doing the best in an inherently unjust system, that still produces a lot of injustice. So it's not really productive to blame them necessarily. Overall, what we should be looking at is, of course, the system. But still, just assuming benevolence from bosses, I don't think so. I've had enough bosses in my day to know that it's not the general rule. I've had good bosses. I have decent managers right now. They're nice and friendly people. They still push us to do extra work that we're not necessarily compensated for. For instance, we have pickup times sometimes, and so it's like a pickup window. So it might be from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock that you have to stop at this one business and pick up packages. Now, it doesn't matter if you only had a few stops before that and you get all of your work done 3 hours ahead of time before that pickup window opens. You still have to wait until that pickup window opens and then go pick it up in that time. And if you don't, you get in big trouble for that. So that means we're sometimes sitting around uncompensated. And they'll be, oh yeah, they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I know that sucks. You have to sit around. Oh, yeah, it's bad system. And then if they're feeling really sympathetic, they might say, oh, that's what the company does to us. They, we got to go with what they say, and they'll kick the can down the road, past the buck. But when it comes down to it, doesn't matter how nice they are personally. They're still pushing us to do uncompensated work. And that's it. And that really is the rule. I hate to break it to you. That is the rule. Because as Marx said, there's inherent conflict between classes. There's inherent class antagonism. The owners have a vested interest in getting as much labor for as low a price as possible out of their workers as possible. If Bezos had his way, people would not even take bathroom breaks in the course of their job. They would just, because that's time that they're not working, and that's time that they could abuse the privileges and spend too long in the bathroom on their phone or whatever. So that's the inherent desire of the bosses. Now, the workers, on the other hand, want to do as little work for as large as profit or as large as compensation as possible, right? This is an inherent conflict between the classes. That's the essence of the class struggle. I'm not saying that all bosses are bad, but all bosses in a capitalist formation of an enterprise are participating in a bad system, an inherently exploitative system. So yeah, I've had plenty of bosses that are really friendly. Like I used to work out of a different office doing my deliveries, a different station, and my boss there, great guy. Anytime you call, he's there to back you up. You have any troubles with any of the deliveries, the pickups, whatever, he's got your back. Really kind, really forgiving, so on and so on. He still made a ton of money off of every one of those routes. And there still was plenty of times where I would be sitting around again, waiting for a pickup window and not being compensated for it. And, he would make vague promises. Like, I'd be like, I really like working for you, but it's just not enough money. And this one was very far from my house as well. So like the commute's just so long. And he'd be like, oh yeah, well, maybe be able to see if I can get you some money. And he maybe tried to. I mean, he didn't really try, because I saw his house. I delivered to his house. His house was in one of the routes. In fact, he lived pretty well. He lived so well that he could afford to put his mom up. I don't believe his wife had to work. She could just stay home and watch the kids. And it was a nice house with probably 10 acres or more of land. And it was modern. I'm sure he had the thing constructed himself. He was making out pretty good. So he could have shaken a few extra dollars per day out of his pocket to all of us, but he didn't. And I would spend times, whether or not you want to assign neglect to it, but the trucks break down sometimes, and there would be times where I'd have to take the truck over to a repair station, a repair shop, and just kind of wait around. And that's, again, time that I'm not compensated, because the way the compensation system works with my particular delivery service is you get paid by the number of stops. There's like a base rate, and then once you go a number of stops beyond that point, you get paid so much per stop. So that means that anytime that I'm not actively delivering is time that I'm not getting paid. So that includes gassing up, that includes waiting for pickup windows, that includes travel time. Some of these routes, like they hit a lot of country routes. So there'd be a lot of routes where I'd have to drive half an hour, 45 minutes out to get to my first stop, and then half an hour back at the end of the day. All time that I'm not compensated for. I didn't get any extra for doing that route versus one that was much closer in. And he had other routes that were much closer in. Compensated those guys just the same. So even though he's a great guy personally, one of the best bosses I've ever worked for in many aspects, and he was pretty generous with his pay. He certainly could have been a lot more generous, and he certainly could have offered benefits. He just chose not to. It's how it is. So it's not necessarily anything personal. You can definitely chalk it up more than anything to the system, but at the end of the day, it's an exploitative system. Yeah, and also you don't get paid. That's a good point, Ancoms.com. You don't get paid for your commute time to and from your job either. So if you have a long commute, not only is that more gas usually, but that's a lot less of your free time that you have. But you end up getting compensated only for the time that you're clocked in. They don't pay you any different. Getting past on the comments. Let me get back to that one. Ooh, it's coming up on 9 o'clock, so I think we're going to wrap it up real quick. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Scatterbox, most people in charge are regular people like you and me, you and I. Of course, that means that, is there any real justification for them being in charge, or is it just luck of the draw? Like, if there's nothing inherently better about them, why do they deserve so much more compensation? So that alone, a little food for thought. Let's see, get through a couple more comments. Oh yeah, so Ancoms.com had said you're curious you don't pay them for the time to and from the job site. Is that they're spending, this is time they're spending for the purposes of the job, absolutely, which they cannot spend doing other things. Although, I mean, the amount of people who text and drive, it's a little bit debatable, but I know what you mean by that. So it's time that you're still exclusively bound to you, that is still exclusively bound to you as their boss, yet they're not paid for it. That's a good thing to point out. I realize that paying for this is not the norm, but it should be. Sure, why not? Yeah, like you said, that's not free time. So when they say 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours to do with what you will, do with what you will is the part that ends up getting chopped up the most. Because, commuting to work, taking a lunch break, these are all counted towards your free time, but it's not really free time. It's not free time at all. Oh, so Scatterbox says, the way I see it, they're not bound to me. They agreed to work for a job, offered to provide an important service. They work in my market. My budget would go bust if I started paying them not to work. Kind of, but no, not really overall. I mean, you could definitely pay them more. You could pay them. You literally can pay them the amount of money they bring into the company minus expenses. Right? I mean, that's the reason to have employees under capitalism, is because they bring more money into your company than they're costing you in all the cost of labor. So insurance, I don't know, all the different expenses that go into employing people. You take all that stuff out and you take out their compensation, you have money left over. That money was not just conjured out of thin air. That was made by the efforts of your employees. So you're taking some of the fruits of their labor for yourself because you are the owner. That's it. All right. Thank you so much for your great comments, Ancom, SciCom. Always great to have you here. You always add quite a bit to the conversation, so I look forward to seeing you in future streams. Have a good night as well. We're going to wrap up ourselves too, though, pretty soon here. In fact, let's get to the next. Let's get to the end of the next paragraph, and then we'll call it a night.
More sanitary and hygienic, and generally better the conditions of labor. They realize it is a good investment. It results in increased contentment and consequently greater efficiency of their workers. The principle is sound. Today, of course, it is being exploited for the sole purpose of bigger profits. But under anarchism, it would be applied not only for the sake of personal gain, but in the interests of the worker's health, for the lightening of labor. Our progress in mechanics is so great and continually advancing that the most hard toil could be eliminated by the use of modern machinery and labor-saving devices.
All right, that's a good place to leave it. That brings up another good point. Think of it under our current system, under capitalism. Anytime there's an advance in automation that makes the process go faster, that makes more work be able to be done by your workers, who gets the benefit of that? It is definitely not the workers. It's not as though every time they put in an automatic checkout machine at the grocery store, the rest of the checkout people get a bump in pay because more money is coming into the company for less expense than it would be to have a person standing there. No, all of those gains go to the owner because it is assumed that because they own the operation, they're entitled to all of the profits. And because you don't have to employ a machine or any sort of labor-saving device, any gain that comes from it goes straight to you. So what we're talking about in any sort of socialist system, even again in the most baseline, market socialism, where the workers still own the means of production, in that case, when there's an advance in automation, when more work is able to be done with less effort by the people, by the workers themselves, the worker owners, then they get to decide where all of that extra benefit goes to. They might decide to give themselves raises. They might just take all of that for themselves. They might invest it for future endeavors or to expand. They might decide, hey, since we're making we could make the same amount of money and work less hours, let's just work less hours. The point is it all goes to them instead. And that's a much more fair and just and equitable system, because why should the owner get all the value of increased productivity? We were many times more productive than we were 100 years ago, just as a people. Like any job you can think of, many times more productive. And yet there's still people that struggle to survive. There's still people that struggle to put food on the table. How can that be? We're so much more productive as a society. We have so much more stuff. We physically don't need to have starvation or homelessness or bad health. I mean, to the extent that healthcare can remedy bad health, there's no need to have this stuff, but we still choose to have this stuff because all of those gains over the past 100 years, over the past however long of capitalism, has gone to the capital owners instead of the workers themselves. Even though the workers are producing more, they never get the benefit of that gain. What now? I missed something there. I'm going to go back in the comments here. So, Ancom said that they were okay. I missed a bunch of comments there. Trying to catch up then. and then we'll sign off for the night. Gotta go. Okay, so that's the part. Good night. Okay, have a good night. Okay. Oh, so they just started streaming. Okay, we'll take a look. So Scatterbox says, just remember the 1% in this world would make $34,000 a year or more. Okay. We live in a fantastic society here. Let's spread capitalism and markets everywhere. But beginning, if all the benefits are good, or most of the benefits are going to go to the top, no matter what, in capitalism, capitalism has to take the form of a pyramid. In order to support every level up, you have to have more and more employees below, because you have to have somewhere to take that excess labor value from. Again, money doesn't just produce itself. It has to come from someone's effort. So there's only so many CEO positions possible. We can't all be CEOs, because then no one would have employees. We can't all be business owners, because then no one would have employees to do the work. It has to be a pyramidal system. So no matter how good society is overall, it's going to be a whole lot better for the people at the top. That's just a fact under capitalism. It cannot be otherwise. Cannot provide for everybody. There always has to be the bulk of people that are left behind the most. All we're talking about is a system where we're leveling things out a lot more. So I don't understand what you're saying. The 1% in this world make $34,000 a year or more. Are you saying that right now under capitalism that's the case? Because yeah, the 1% make way more than 34,000 a year. Like the median income. Let's see what the median income is even. It's a household of one. Let's see. Looking into it. Do got to wrap up real quick though. Median household income was $67,000 in 2020, a decrease of 2.9% from 2019. How big is the household though? That's the question. We're talking about 2 income earners or just one. Because remember, median too is not average income. It's just the person in the middle of everything. Average income is going to be higher because the super, super, super wealthy really throw off the average, but they don't throw off the median as much. I assume that's where you're getting your figures from, though. So it's the income of every resident in that household over the age of 15, including pre-tax wages and salaries, along with any pre-tax personal business, investment, and other recurring sources of income, as well as any kinds of government entitlement, such as unemployment, Social Security, disability, child support, and so forth. So that would be with an average of 2 people, right? I don't know. Oops, I hit the wrong button. That's not what I meant to do at all. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. So you say that's why we keep capitalism in check and redistribute wealth with measured approach. And that's a way to make things more fair. Why not just do away with all exploitation? Why make it so that in order to make money at a business, you have to work and not just own? Because right now you can just be an owner. You could buy an Arby's franchise and hire a bunch of people, and then hire people to hire people, and then walk away and still make money. How is that possible? Because your money is working for you. That's how they always like to put it, which really means other people are working for you, and you're taking some of the value that their labor produces for yourself because you're an owner. Why don't we just do away with that? You'd have more investment by the average employee, because someone is struggling in my parking lot. Which, again, to sing the praises of our glorious landlords, I don't think they've plowed that back lot all winter, and so right now it's a skating rink because we've had tons of freeze thaw cycles, and yet we pay month after month to have a parking spot. We have to pay for all our parking spots. There's no parking spots for the guests or community or anything like that. It's all paid parking. And I don't think they've plowed it once. Maybe one time they did, but it's been pretty scant. Anyway, back more on that subject. Let's just do away with exploitation of labor. Let's make it so that in order to have a business, everyone who is a worker is also an owner, and they at least have a say in basic things like who gets compensated what the scheduling is, what the benefits are, how time off works, workplace conditions, that sort of thing. If you worked for a business, if you worked for a worker-owned cooperative, and you knew that moving more of unit X or service Y was literally going to make you more money, wouldn't that alone be incentive to work as hard as you can, within reason? Wouldn't you want to be actually doing whatever it is that your endeavor is doing? Because it would mean more money for you. Now it doesn't, unless you have some sort of profit sharing scheme. You're going to make your $8.25 an hour, no matter how many burgers you flip or don't flip. You're going to make your whatever the wage is, regardless of how much work you actually end up doing. That doesn't seem like a good incentivizing structure. It'd be far better if you do more work and you have more compensation, right? Yeah, thanks for having the conversation, Scatterbox. I always enjoy it. I think that's going to do it for tonight, though. Let's see, how many of you are still on Twitch? 6 of you. All right, we're going to do a raid then. If you'd like to nominate someone to be raided on Twitch, now's the time to pipe up and tell me. Otherwise, I'm going to see who's online and choose myself. Might do non-compete. Let's see who is on. Oh, for We're Many. Maybe I'll raid into them. Unless, did someone have a, whoops. I picked the wrong button. Let's get rid of that tab entirely. There we go. Okay. Who are we going to pick? Just raiding into somebody, and then I'll be done. Who are we going to do? Let's do non-compete. They don't have that many people on, so assuming they're actually talking already. Oh, that's a phantom hand. Oh my God.
No one can see it.
Yeah, everyone can see it. Let's raid non-compete. So stick with me, all you Twitchers. there's the person we're gonna raid. So check them out if you don't feel like doing it right now. And otherwise, hang with me while we commence raiding. Good night, John. Thanks for being here. Thanks to everyone who commented. Yeah, hope to see you all Friday. Gonna do some more Witcher stuff. All right, only 2 people coming with, but that's cool. All right, good night, y'all. See you next time.